A millionaire pays his secretary to have a baby, but 1 year later he was shocked by what he saw. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. It was a rainy evening in downtown Manhattan when Claire Thompson sat alone in the office, her fingers trembling as she packed the last stack of documents into the cabinet. She was just a secretary, paid by the hour, running on instant coffee and bus rides. To her, the skyscraper was not a palace. It was a cage that reminded her every day of what she did not have. Behind the glass wall, the door opened. Alexander Grant, the billionaire CEO, walked in. His presence was cold, precise, every step echoing like a verdict. He was the kind of man people feared, admired, and gossiped about in glossy magazines. He did not waste words, and tonight he had only one proposal. Claire, his voice was steady, detached. I need an heir. You will have my child. In return, you will receive financial security beyond anything you have ever known. Her heart froze. She looked at him, searching for a sign that this was some cruel joke, but his expression was unreadable. He slid a thick envelope across the desk. Inside was a contract, the ink waiting for her name, along with a figure so large she could barely comprehend it. Enough to pay her mother's medical bills, enough to free her younger brother from debt, enough to end the cycle of scraping by. Claire's lips trembled. Why me? You could have anyone. Why your secretary? Alexander leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. Because you are ordinary. You are discreet. You are not after fame or glamour. That makes you suitable. The word cut deeper than any insult. Suitable. As if she were nothing more than a vessel, a choice on a checklist. She wanted to scream, to tear the contract apart, but the memory of her mother coughing in a hospital bed silenced her anger. The pen felt heavy in her hand. She signed. And in that moment, her fate was sealed. Outside, the storm raged, lightning slashing across the sky like a warning. But inside that office, it was the quiet beginning of a deal that would change both of their lives forever. What neither of them knew was that within 1 year, this contract would not only bring a child into the world, but it would also tear down walls, expose secrets, and reveal a truth that money could never control. The following weeks passed under the shadow of that signature. Claire moved into a private residence arranged by Alexander, a penthouse high above the restless streets of Manhattan. It was not a home. It was a gilded cage lined with marble floors and silent hallways. A private doctor visited twice a week. A nutritionist left meal plans on the counter. Everything was taken care of, except the one thing Claire longed for: human warmth. Rules had been drawn into the contract. No public affection, no photographs together, no involvement of emotions. The agreement was simple. She would carry his child, and in return, she would receive security. But living inside those rules felt like suffocating behind glass. At dinners, Alexander sat across from her at a long polished table, speaking only when necessary. Did the doctor confirm the prenatal vitamins? He asked one night, his tone clipped, as if this was a board meeting rather than a meal. Claire nodded, her fork trembling in her hand. Yes. That was all. Silence swallowed the room again, broken only by the ticking of the antique clock. Claire began to write in a small notebook, a private diary where she tracked the baby's growth, her cravings, her fears. She pressed dried petals between the pages, a fragile reminder that life could still bloom inside this arrangement. That notebook became her secret anchor, but outside the penthouse, the whispers had already begun. Society pages questioned why the cold billionaire's secretary had suddenly disappeared from the office. Some suspected an affair, others sneered that she was just another woman chasing fortune. When Alexander's family noticed, the comments grew sharper. At a charity gala, one of his relatives leaned close and hissed in Claire's ear, "You will never be one of us. You are just the hired help." The words stung more than she admitted. She tried to hold her composure, smiling faintly, but her chest burned. When Alexander joined the group, he did not defend her. He stood in silence, sipping his champagne, as though her humiliation was invisible. That night, Claire locked herself in her room and cried until dawn. Still, she carried on with quiet strength. She attended every medical appointment. She followed every rule. She even placed her hand gently over her growing belly, whispering promises to the child who had become her only true companion. In those moments, she forgot about contracts and rules. She remembered only that she was a mother, and this child deserved love. What Claire did not know was that Alexander, behind his rigid mask, was watching her more closely than she realized. He noticed the way she placed a pillow behind her back at dinner, the way she hummed to herself while arranging fresh flowers, the way her hand lingered on her stomach with tenderness. For the first time in years, something cracked in him. He refused to show it, but he felt it. And so, while the city glittered with lights and whispered with rumors, two people sat trapped in a contract. One clung to survival, the other hid behind power. Neither admitted that the lines between duty and emotion were already beginning to blur. The first true storm of conflict came during a business banquet held at a luxury hotel overlooking Central Park. Claire arrived beside Alexander, dressed in a simple navy gown chosen by his assistant. The room glittered with diamonds and laughter, but every whisper seemed to trail behind her like a shadow. People looked, judged, and smirked, as if her presence was some scandal to be dissected. At first, she tried to stay silent, clutching her small evening bag and keeping close to Alexander. But silence did not protect her. A cluster of socialites drifted near, their smiles sharp as glass. "Is that her? The secretary?" one woman murmured, loud enough for Claire to hear. Another laughed softly. "I suppose even billionaires want to save money somewhere." A third added with venom, "She will be gone in less than a year. We all know why she is here." Dever won. The words struck Claire like blows. She stood frozen, her eyes burning, but Alexander did not intervene. He kept his gaze fixed on the stage, sipping his wine as though the scene unfolding beside him was beneath notice. That silence hurt more than the cruelty of strangers. Later that night, while speeches echoed from the podium, Alexander's cousin cornered Claire near the terrace. His smile was false, his voice dripping with disdain. "Do you really think carrying his child makes you part of this family? You are a transaction, a name on a contract, nothing more." Claire swallowed hard, refusing to let tears fall where they could be seen. She turned away, whispering to herself, "I am doing this for my family, for my child." Yet her heart cracked a little deeper. When the evening finally ended, the car ride back to the penthouse was wrapped in silence. Claire stared out the tinted window, watching raindrops chase each other down the glass. She wanted him to say something, anything, but Alexander remained rigid, his profile sharp against the city lights. Inside the penthouse, Claire escaped to her room. She pulled out her notebook and scribbled furiously, her pen scratching across the page. "Tonight they called me nothing. Tonight he let them." Her tears smudged the ink, but she kept writing until her hand shook. Days passed, and the tension did not ease. The whispers in society columns grew louder, painting her as a gold digger, a scandal, an embarrassment. At the office, former colleagues avoided her gaze, their silence screaming louder than words. And through it all, Alexander remained distant, offering no shield, no reassurance. Yet Claire endured. She carried herself with quiet dignity, refusing to abandon the life growing inside her. She continued to attend appointments, to prepare for motherhood, even as loneliness wrapped itself tighter around her heart. But the fracture was already widening. What had begun as a cold arrangement was shifting into something far more fragile and dangerous. A battle between pride and vulnerability, silence and longing. Claire's patience was wearing thin, and Alexander's silence was building a wall too high for either of them to climb. What neither of them realized was that the next test was coming, and this time, it would not be whispered insults at a banquet. It would be life and death, a moment that would force Alexander to choose whether his silence would destroy everything, or whether he would finally step forward and show the truth of his heart. It happened on a gray afternoon, weeks after the banquet humiliation that still echoed in Claire's heart. She had insisted on walking through a local market near the river, wanting to feel like a normal person again, wanting to breathe air that did not smell like polished marble and locked doors. The security detail trailed behind, discreet but present. Claire moved slowly between stalls, her hand resting over her growing belly, pausing to admire fresh flowers and ripe apples. For a brief moment, she felt almost free. But freedom is fragile. As she stepped from the curb, a delivery van came skidding around the corner, brakes screeching against the wet pavement. Time seemed to fracture. Shouts rang out. Someone screamed her name. Claire froze, instinctively shielding her stomach with her arms. Then strong hands grabbed her and pulled her back just as the vehicle roared past, missing her by mere inches. She stumbled, breathless, collapsing against a chest she recognized instantly. Alexander, his arms wrapped around her, steady, unyielding. For the first time, the mask was gone. His voice shook with urgency. "Are you hurt?" "Claire, answer me." Tears blurred her vision as she shook her head. "The baby. I think we are all right." Without hesitation, Alexander lifted her into the waiting car, barking orders to the driver, his composure fractured by panic. At the hospital, he did not leave her side. He paced the hallway while doctors checked her, his usually cold expression raw with fear. When the physician finally emerged and assured them both that mother and child were safe, Alexander exhaled so deeply it was as if he had been holding his breath for years. Inside the hospital room, Claire rested on the bed, pale but calm. On the nightstand lay her small notebook, the one she always carried. It had slipped from her bag during the chaos, its pages bent and stained. Alexander picked it up, thumbing through lines of handwriting he was never meant to see. He read about her loneliness, her humiliation, her whispered promises to the child. The words struck him harder than any insult ever could. When Claire stirred and noticed him holding it, she whispered, "Please, give it back." He hesitated, then set it gently on the table. But his eyes met hers, unguarded, heavy with something she had never seen before. Regret, vulnerability. "You should not have been there alone," he said quietly. I should have protected you." For a moment, silence filled the room, thick with unspoken truths. Claire wanted to believe the tenderness in his tone, but memories of his silence at the banquet still haunted her. She turned her face away, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. Alexander remained by the bed through the night. He did not leave, not once. His gaze lingered on her, on the fragile strength she carried, on the child they would soon meet. Something inside him had shifted. He had saved her, yes, but in truth, it was she who was beginning to save him. And yet, neither of them spoke the words that trembled on their lips. Because even in the quiet glow of the hospital, they were still bound by a contract. And contracts did not allow for love. But love was already writing itself between the lines. The days after the accident were strangely quiet. Alexander arranged for Claire to recover in a private wing of his penthouse, a space filled with sunlight and carefully chosen comforts. Doctors checked on her regularly, and staff hovered at a respectful distance. Yet what surprised Claire most was Alexander himself. He stayed, not just in brief appearances, but in long silences, sitting across from her while she read, watching over her during meals, making sure every detail was right. One evening, the city glowed outside the wide glass windows, lights stretching endlessly into the night. Claire sat curled on the sofa, her notebook in her lap, when Alexander finally broke the silence. "Claire," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "You asked me once why I chose you." She looked up cautiously. "Yes, and you told me I was suitable." The words still cut, even now. His jaw tightened, but instead of retreating into coldness, he leaned forward, his eyes shadowed by something deeper. "The truth is, I do not trust easily. My world has been filled with people who wanted my money, my name, or my power. I have been used before, betrayed. I could not face another person pretending to care, only to sell me out in the end." Claire's chest softened with sympathy, but she kept her voice steady. "So, you chose someone ordinary, someone you believed had no ambition but survival." Alexander's gaze held hers. "I chose someone who looked at me like a man, not a prize. That is rarer than you think." For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy with truths that neither had spoken aloud. Claire placed her notebook aside and folded her hands over her stomach. "My dreams were never about wealth or power," she said softly. "I wanted a simple home. A little garden, where I could grow flowers. I wanted my mother to be healthy, my brother to have a chance at a decent life. I wanted peace, not luxury." Her voice cracked, and she quickly blinked away tears. "When you offered me that contract, I thought I was selling away pieces of myself. But then I realized maybe I was only trying to buy a future for my family." Alexander's expression shifted, his usual iron mask cracking. He looked at her not as a secretary bound by an agreement, but as a woman carrying both strength and fragility. His hand twitched as if he wanted to reach out, but he stopped himself, gripping the armrest instead. "You deserve more than this arrangement," he said finally, his voice raw. "And I am beginning to realize, so do I." Claire's breath caught. For the first time, she saw the man behind the empire, a man scarred by trust and loneliness, reaching for something real. Neither of them said the word love. Not yet. But in that quiet exchange, the lines of the contract blurred even further, and the fragile possibility of something greater began to take shape. The fragile trust that had begun to grow between them did not last long. The world outside their quiet moments was not kind, and Alexander's family was determined to remind Claire that she did not belong. It started one afternoon when Alexander was called into an emergency board meeting. Claire was resting in the lounge, reading quietly, when the door opened and two sharply dressed women entered. His mother and his sister. Their expressions were as cold as the marble floor beneath their heels. "Claire," his mother said without greeting, her tone crisp as glass, "let us speak plainly. You were hired to perform a duty, nothing more." Claire's heart pounded. She set her book aside and stood, her hands instinctively covering her belly. "I know what the contract says," she whispered. The older woman's eyes narrowed. "Good. Then you will also know that once the child is born, there will be no need for you here. You will receive your payment. You will disappear. That was the agreement, was it not?" Claire felt her chest tighten, but before she could respond, Alexander's sister stepped closer, holding out a check already signed. The number written across it made Claire's stomach turn. "Take this now," she said coolly. "Leave before you embarrass him further. You have served your purpose." Tears stung Claire's eyes, but anger burned hotter. "Is that truly how you see me? A vessel? A transaction?" The sister smirked. "You were never anything else." Before Claire could answer, Alexander entered the room. He froze at the sight of the check, his jaw hardening. His mother spoke quickly. "Alexander, it is for the best. End this farce before it ruins your reputation." Oh, for one breathless moment, Claire prayed he would defend her, deny their cruelty, stand by the fragile truth they had begun to share. But Alexander's silence cut deeper than any insult. He did not take the check away. He did not throw his family out. He stood torn, his hesitation speaking louder than words. Claire's heart shattered. The hope she had dared to feel dissolved into ash. She whispered, her voice trembling. "I see now. To you, I was never more than a contract." Oh, before Alexander could answer, she tore the agreement from her bag. The pages ripped in her hands, falling like broken feathers to the floor. With tears streaming down her face, she turned and walked away, clutching her belly as if shielding her child from the cruelty of the world. That night, Claire packed her belongings into a single suitcase. She left the penthouse without looking back, vanishing into the anonymity of the city streets. She had no plan, no security, only determination. She would raise her child on her own, even if it meant struggling, even if it meant breaking. In the silence of the penthouse, Alexander stood staring at the torn contracts scattered across the floor. For the first time, the empire he had built felt hollow, and the emptiness echoed louder than any boardroom victory. He had power, wealth, and reputation. But the one thing he was beginning to realize he needed most was already gone. Winter came with heavy snow, blanketing the city in silence. Claire had found shelter in a modest apartment on the east side, working part-time at a small bookstore to keep herself afloat as her due date drew closer. The nights were cold, and the heating barely worked. But she wrapped herself in blankets and whispered lullabies to her unborn child. She told herself she did not need Alexander, that she could survive alone. Yet deep inside, her heart ached with the memory of his hesitation, of the moment he failed to stand for her. The pain struck one bitter night. It began as a tightening in her abdomen. sharp enough to make her gasp. She clutched the edge of the counter, realizing the contractions had come too soon. Fear surged through her. She was alone. She tried to reach her phone, her trembling fingers barely managing to dial for an ambulance. By the time the paramedics arrived, she was drenched in sweat, her breaths ragged. "Please, save my baby," she whispered as they lifted her onto the stretcher. Her notebook slipped from her bag and tumbled onto the floor, the pages marked with her hopes, her dreams, and her fears. At that very hour, across the city, Alexander sat in his office, staring at the torn remnants of the contract he had refused to throw away. His empire felt meaningless, his victories hollow. When his assistant rushed in with frantic news, "Sir, Claire has been taken to the hospital. It is critical." His world tilted. He did not think. He simply ran. When he arrived at the hospital, the sound of monitors and hurried footsteps filled the air. Doctors and nurses swarmed the corridor. He caught sight of Claire through the glass, her face pale, her body trembling with exhaustion as she fought to bring their child into the world. Panic carved lines into his usually steady features. He pressed his hands against the glass. "Please, do not take her from me," he whispered. Moments later, alarms blared. A doctor emerged, grave and direct. "We may lose one of them. We need you to understand." Alexander's breath caught. The thought of choosing shattered him. Without hesitation, he said, "Save them both. Do whatever it takes. Do not let her go. I need her. I need them." Inside the delivery room, Claire's consciousness wavered. She thought she heard his voice, raw and pleading, cutting through the haze. Her heart clenched with disbelief. Could it be real? Did he come back? Hours felt like an eternity. But finally, the cries of a newborn pierced the silence. The baby was alive. Claire, though weak and fragile, had survived. Tears blurred Alexander's vision as he stepped inside, clutching both her hand and the tiny child swaddled in a blanket. He bent close, his voice breaking. "I am sorry for every moment I let you stand alone. I am sorry for being silent when you needed me most. No contract binds us anymore. I do not want an agreement. I want you. I want our child. I want a family." Claire's tired eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "Do you mean it? Truly?" Alexander nodded, pressing her hand to his chest. "Yes, I am done hiding behind walls. I choose you. I choose us." For the first time, the empire of steel and glass that defined his life felt human, fragile, and real. And as he held the woman who had risked everything, and the child who bound them together, Alexander knew the truth. Love had conquered what wealth and power never could. The news of the child's birth spread quickly through the upper echelons of society. Whispers swirled in drawing rooms and across glossy magazine pages. Some speculated that Alexander Grant, the ruthless billionaire, had finally secured his heir. Others sneered that the mother, a former secretary, would soon be cast aside. But they did not know what had truly happened inside that hospital room. Days later, Alexander called a press conference at his company's headquarters. Cameras flashed as reporters filled the hall, waiting for another calculated statement from the man known for his icy control. Instead, they witnessed something entirely different. With Claire by his side, pale but radiant, holding their newborn son, Alexander stepped up to the podium. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder, a gesture of protection and pride. The room hushed. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alexander began, his voice steady but carrying a warmth never heard before. "For many years, I believed power and control were enough. I built walls around myself and called it strength. But today, I stand before you with the truth. This woman is not a scandal. She is not a transaction. She is the mother of my child, and she is the woman I love." "Oh," the crowd gasped, cameras flashing wildly. His family, seated near the front, shifted uncomfortably, their disapproval clear. But Alexander continued, unwavering. "I once thought a contract could define our future. I was wrong. Love is not built on signatures or clauses. Love is built on sacrifice, on loyalty, on courage. Claire has shown me what true strength looks like, and I will spend the rest of my life honoring that." He reached for her hand, lifting it for the world to see. "From this moment on, I will not hide. Claire is my partner, my equal, and the woman I choose, not because of obligation, but because of my heart." The hall erupted in a storm of questions and flashes, but Claire barely heard them. She looked at Alexander, stunned by the words he had spoken openly, the words she had once begged him to say. For the first time, he had stood against his world and chosen her. His mother rose from her seat, her face tight with disapproval. "Alexander, do you realize what you are doing?" He met her gaze calmly. "Yes, mother. I am protecting my family, my real family." There was no argument left to give. The truth had been declared before the world. And no check, no cruel whisper, no social snub could erase it. That evening, back at the penthouse, Alexander prepared a small dinner for Claire. No assistants, no chefs, just him in the kitchen fumbling with simple recipes. Claire watched from the table, smiling softly at the sight of a man once defined by boardrooms now burning toast in an effort to make her laugh. When the meal was finally served, imperfect but heartfelt, Alexander knelt before her. In his hand was not a contract, but a velvet box. He opened it, revealing a ring that gleamed in the soft light. "This time," he said, his voice breaking with sincerity, "I am not asking for a deal. I am asking for forever. Claire, will you marry me?" Her eyes filled with tears, her hand trembling as she reached for his. "Yes," she whispered, her voice steady despite the emotion. "Yes, I will." And in that moment, the woman once dismissed as suitable became the center of his world, not through wealth or status, but through love that had endured every test. Spring returned to New York with blossoms along the park paths and warm sunlight spilling across the city skyline. Months had passed since the press conference, since Alexander's public declaration, since Claire had whispered yes to his proposal. The world had watched with fascination, some with admiration, others with envy. But for Claire and Alexander, life had settled into something far more precious than headlines. Their wedding was small by billionaire standards, held in a quiet garden, surrounded by close friends and a handful of family who had finally accepted the truth. The grandeur of wealth was present, but it was not the centerpiece. The centerpiece was love. Claire walked down the aisle in a simple gown, her hand trembling as she held a small bouquet of white lilies. Alexander stood waiting, his eyes never leaving hers, not even for a moment. When he placed the ring on her finger, there was no contract, no negotiation, only a promise. "I will protect you, not with walls, but with my heart," he said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. Claire's tears shimmered as she whispered her vows in return, words of love, born not from obligation, but from survival, forgiveness, and choice. Their son, dressed in a tiny suit, was carried by Alexander's sister, who had once scorned Claire but now looked at her with softened eyes. The child gurgled happily, unaware that his birth had transformed lives, unaware that he had been the bridge that brought two wounded souls together. After the ceremony, photographs captured the new family standing beneath the blooming cherry trees. Alexander's arm wrapped securely around Claire's waist, his other hand resting gently on the stroller beside them. Claire leaned into him, her smile radiant, her gaze filled with quiet triumph. She was no longer the woman whispered about as the secretary. She was his wife, his partner, the mother of his child, and the beating heart of his empire. Later that evening, as the guests departed and the garden lights twinkled against the night, Claire found herself alone with Alexander. Their son slept peacefully nearby, his tiny breaths a lullaby of hope. Alexander pulled from his pocket a small velvet pouch. From it, he revealed a delicate necklace, the very piece he had once dismissed as unimportant, now polished and gleaming. "This," he said softly, fastening it around her neck, "is not payment. It is not part of any deal. It is a symbol, a reminder of the woman who taught me that love cannot be bought or bargained. It must be chosen, every day." Claire touched the necklace with trembling fingers, her eyes brimming with tears. "And I choose you, Alexander. Not for your name, not for your fortune, but because you are the man who came back when I thought I had lost everything." He kissed her gently, sealing a promise deeper than any vow spoken in public. As the night deepened, the three of them sat together beneath the soft glow of lanterns. Claire cradled their son, Alexander's arm encircled them both, and the world outside seemed to fade away. No wealth, no scandal, no cruel whispers could break what they had built. In that final image, love stood taller than any skyscraper. A secretary who once signed a contract had become a wife, cherished beyond measure. A billionaire who once believed only in power had discovered that true strength was vulnerability, devotion, and family. And as their son stirred softly in his mother's arms, Alexander whispered the words he had once feared most, but now embraced fully. This is forever.